The days between Christmas and New Year 1980 in Rendlesham Forest, Suffolk, England were without a doubt witness to some of the strangest events to ever unfold. Events that saw a vehicle potentially from another world land in the woodland between two military bases. Exactly what happened remains a fierce topic of debate, and the incident is one of the most controversial UFO encounters on record. The Rendlesham Forest UFO incident is without a doubt one of the most intriguing UFO cases in history. A pair of close encounter sightings with alleged vehicles from another world that have captivated those in the UFO community for decades. And these sightings involve multiple American soldiers on two separate occasions near American military bases in the south of England. And the years that have followed, particularly in light of the internet, have only served to create more intrigue and mystery around these events. From mistakenly leaked documents to apparent whistleblowers and the slightly differing versions of events, the case remains of importance in helping shed light on the UFO mystery. Indeed, the Rendlesham Forest incident has proven to not only be one of the most investigated UFO cases of all time, and one that still fascinates researchers today, but also one of the most controversial as far as who said what, who saw what, and who is telling the truth. At around 3 AM in the early hours of December 26, 1980 at RAF Woodbridge, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston were on patrol duty. They would suddenly notice a strange light in the skies over the woodland next to the base. Believing a small plane or a helicopter had made an emergency landing or even crashed, they would seek permission to investigate. Both Burroughs and Penniston, along with another soldier, ventured into the forest to find out what this strange light was. According to the eventual report of Charles Halt, the men witnessed a strange glowing object that was metallic in appearance and triangular in shape. Their estimates would suggest the object was around 7 feet high and between 7 to 10 feet across. The white light from the object illuminated the entire forest, so bright in fact that none of the men could tell for certain if it was hovering or if it sat on legs. The closer they got to it, the more interference they experienced on their communications radios. Burroughs and Penniston continued forward, eventually stopping around 150 feet from the strange craft. While Burroughs appeared to be slightly overwhelmed with the bizarre events that were unfolding, Penniston was completely focused. As he moved closer to the object, it became clear that he was looking at some kind of futuristic vehicle. He could clearly see that the surface was smooth and black, almost like glass. He recalled that the object appeared to be made from one piece of material, and even stranger, he could see no obvious signs of propulsion for this curious craft. Further to his surprise were the raised etchings, like sandpaper in texture, of strange symbols that looked like Egyptian hieroglyphics. When he reached out and touched these symbols, he recalled everything around him going white. When this bright light took over, he could no longer hear or see anything. In fact, at one stage, he believed the object was about to explode, and so he backed away from it in a defensive shielding position. As he did so, the object rose into the air and vanished into the trees. At the same time, Penniston could hear the anxious calls of what he thought was nearby farm animals. He would later recall how, despite not seeing any physical occupants inside the craft, he had the bizarre feeling that something alive was very much present, and that something was intelligent, alien or not. The unit returned to base. However, a further brief sighting occurred around an hour later, shortly after 4 AM, when a bright object was witnessed near the back gate. During that time, both Burroughs and Penniston were debriefed. Part of that debriefing was to inform them that they should forget anything they had seen, clearly suggesting to them that a cover-up was already in motion. As soon as daylight broke over the forest grounds, the two witnesses made their way back to the area to examine the scene. Amazingly, where the men claimed to have witnessed the object before their approach were 3 depressions in a very specific formation. Once back in his room a little later, strange visions began to force their way into Penniston's mind. A series of ones and zeros would literally appear to him out of nowhere, forcing him to write down the sequences. it didn't take him long to realise he was viewing and indeed recalling binary code. There remains great debate as to what this apparent binary message meant. Shortly after the incident, Colonel Charles Halt arrived at the base, and it was during Halt's visit that a second UFO encounter unfolded. On the evening of December 28th, Halt was informed that the UFO was back. Under the orders of his own superiors, he went out to investigate. As he made his way through the woodland, a glowing red object appeared, and it was moving at a considerable pace through the forest. It was at this time that Halt pressed record on the small tape recorder he had brought with him. The recording would eventually find its way into the public domain, and is an excellent peek into not only the authenticity of the incident, but the genuine anxiety and occasional fear of the men involved. What's more, Halt's dialogue certainly does nothing to discredit the encounter.
I have a strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. Yes, it's brighter than it has been. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
As the group continued to watch, another glowing object came into view and hovered overhead.
05. We see strange strobe-like flashes to the rather sporadic, but there's definitely something, some kind of phenomenon. 305 at about 10 degrees horizon directly north. We've got two strange objects, half moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. That gets to be about 5 to 10 miles out, maybe less.
Just what Halt and his unit might have witnessed remains very much open to debate. It is clear from the recordings, though, that something very real was unfolding around them, and that the unit were at a loss as to what they were seeing. Further, according to the report, this second object fired a laser-like beam directly down to the ground, the impact point being only several feet in front of them. The object then made its way to the bunkers along the base. Here, according to many reports, is where nuclear weapons were stored. We should note, though, claims of nuclear weapons come from researchers and their sources, and not from Halt. According to these sources, a beam was fired down towards each of the bunkers, although the reason for this remains unknown. In 1983, through a Freedom of Information request, Halt's memo would find its way into the public domain, and once UFO researchers had examined it for the extremely rich content that it contained, Halt was very much dragged into the limelight. Of further interest is the apparent sudden visit to both the Woodbridge and Bentwaters bases by General Gabriel shortly after the sightings. Gabriel was one of the most powerful US military officers on the European continent, if not the entire US Air Force. During his visit to the air bases in question, he would remove several items of interest in the investigation. Although there is no record of exactly what these items were, it is largely believed they would go to Ramstein in Germany. That very high-ranking officials in the US military had an immense interest in the activities over southern England in the final days of 1980 is obvious. If there was a cover-up of some kind by the US military, and possibly even the British government and armed forces in sympathy with their American guests, then we have to ask, why? In 1994, the revelations of whistleblower Clifford Stone, a former sergeant in the United States military, would create further intrigue around the events of late December 1980. He would offer during a radio interview that even among senior officers there was a total blackout of information. Certain people would only know certain parts of the story. Essentially, all of the hastily arranged unscheduled visits to the two air bases in Sussex were on a need-to-know basis. Stone would continue that many of these unscheduled visits would contain different specialists in different fields. Each one would conduct his or her specific assignments and then give their findings. They would then go back to their previous duties, very likely hearing nothing more of the incident or their part in it. All of these individual reports and results would go towards a final report, one that was official and largely for internal eyes only. According to Clifford Stone, the final report for the Rendlesham Forest incident makes for interesting reading. For example, it would find that witnesses very much saw real objects that were the result of highly advanced technology. So advanced, in fact, that none of those who studied it could replicate it. Furthermore, it was the conclusion of the report that some kind of intelligence was behind the strange visitations, and that intelligence did not originate on Earth. There were, however, other sightings in the run-up to the Rendlesham incident. UFO researcher and investigator Timothy Good would relay the encounters in his book Above Top Secret. The first occurred around 2 weeks before at a little after 4 p.m. on the afternoon of December 15th and was witnessed by Good himself. According to his account, he was walking back to his flat in the Bromley area of London when he noticed a motionless, bright star-like object overhead. At first he thought the light was Venus, its bright glow shining in the early evening sky, but he quickly realised it was in the wrong place. He contemplated that the object could be an airliner or even a balloon, and went to get his telescope in order to get a closer look. However, by the time he returned, the object was no longer there. 6 weeks earlier, in early November 1980, another intriguing encounter unfolded over RAF Neater's Head. The account comes from a radar operator who was on duty on the night in question. He would recall that an aerial anomaly suddenly appeared on his screen at an altitude of around 5,000 feet. As if that wasn't strange enough, the object then suddenly jumped to an altitude of 90,000 feet in what appeared to be a second. Then it simply vanished from the screens. In response, 2 F-4 Phantom jets were sent to investigate the unknown craft. Further, according to the one-time radar operator, although one of the planes did approach the object, it simply disappeared high into the air at a blistering pace. The following day, at least according to the witness, several mystery high-ranking military types arrived at the base. They would take all of the radar tapes and logs from the previous evening. Of course, whether these incidents are connected, directly or indirectly, to the events in Rendlesham Forest remain open to debate. In more recent years, there have been further developments and releasing of information that has brought the Rendlesham Forest incident back into the limelight, and we should note that there was ample reason to believe that some kind of cover-up of the events had been put into place. The amount of whistleblower testimony, the Halt memorandum, and such information as that volunteered by Clifford would all point to such a cover-up. So when in 2011, following the official release of information on the incident, it was announced that several of the files were missing, it was a clear indication to many who had investigated the case that claims of a cover-up were perhaps not as far-fetched as many might think. In 2014 came the found footage-style movie The Rendlesham UFO Incident. The plot revolves around a group of UFO enthusiasts and filmmakers who venture into the woodland hoping to capture footage of a UFO. It is shot on location in Rendlesham Forest, and while the film is obviously a work of fiction, the director, Daniel Simpson, would have some interesting things to say following its completion. Perhaps of particular interest is an account he was told of as he was filming. Simpson would speak to a telecommunications engineer who worked at the base in recent years. The company who owned it wished to have up-to-date communications and internet facilities put into the old base. This, of course, would mean stripping back all of the old network of wiring that had been there for decades and ultimately replacing everything. However, when the engineer began digging down to access this wiring so he could replace and update it, he was in absolute shock at what he saw. He would explain to Simpson that the cables were delivering such a powerful internet connection even though they were from 1980. He would continue that they were so far in advance of what is even available today. Ultimately, Simpson would offer in an interview that it was his firm belief that something very strange went on at Rendlesham Forest, elaborating it was very likely an extraterrestrial encounter. Just what happened in late December 1980 in Rendlesham Forest remains very much open to debate, and looks set to be that way for the foreseeable future. Did an extraterrestrial vehicle land in the woods not once but twice over several days, and if so, what was the purpose of this visit? Might there be some credence to the suggestion that nuclear weapons were stored on the base in question, and might this have been what attracted these apparent otherworldly visitors? And what more information might the military know about those events? What, for example, might be in the missing files, and where might they reside today? And perhaps above all else, whatever the truth of what happened in Rendlesham Forest, What might its remaining secrets tell us not only of those events, but of the wider picture of the UFO and alien question?